So good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday night Anamkara meditation program. With all my heart, with all my love, I welcome you to our program tonight. I'm delighted that you were able to join us for this evening's program. So we get together and celebrate the truth, the divine nature of all that is, the divine nature of your true self. So you come as individuals who are engaged in the practices that empower us to know that directly, and then most importantly, walk it into the world. Because we don't want to just relieve our own suffering, we want to relieve the suffering of all beings. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being ones who are engaged in practice and living it into the world right where you are. So once again, with all my heart, with all my love, I welcome you to our program tonight. And we begin the program with a very simple practice to just help calm the mind and make it more steady, let go of the things of the past, come into being present here and now. And one of the most powerful ways of doing that is combining mantra and breath. And there's a very simple mantra, ancient mantra, simply I am, aham. Right? It's the mantra that invokes the bare awareness of being. Aham, I am. That's simply I am. I am that I am. We come to that awareness that that is our true and full nature. It's not the ordinary I am of I am the mind, I am the body, I am this, I am that. No, it's when we set all that aside, and now there's just the infinitude of awareness, the boundlessness of being. It's I am that. So it's the boundlessness of that being nature that is boundlessly free, boundlessly compassionate. Boundless equanimity is its very nature. So we're coming home to that. So we're letting go of the relative mind and all the little identities we inhabit throughout the day and different situations, different people. All that gets set aside now. So we can just come to rest in being. And we do that very simply, combining the use of the harmonium. So inhaling slowly, and then exhaling. Inhaling, exhaling. As the breath comes in silently in the mind, hum silently in the mind as the breath goes out. Letting go and letting go of all else. Bare awareness of I am. letting go and letting go. Nothing the mind can't let go of. Just resting in your true nature. And just continuing to breathe. That slowing and deepening of the breath. Inviting the breath to sink, to become diaphragmatic. And that slowing. This is an ancient form of pranayama that the yogis discovered literally thousands of years ago. Kind of a brain hack. Because it turns out when we get into that slower, deeper paced breathing, well, it has a profound impact on the neurophysiology of our brain, our body, the stress response, the fight, flight, freeze response. All of that can be calmed down if we just stay with a patterned, paced, slowing and deepening of the breath, and letting our attention really rest on the breath all the way as it comes in, all the way as it goes out. And if we're also kind of silently listening for the ah as the breath comes in, and the hum as the breath comes out. The breath, in a sense, is invoking that simple awareness. I am. I am. It's the awareness of I am free. I'm infinite. I'm the boundlessness of pure being. That is what we come home to. It's what all the practices aim at bringing us home to. All the mystical practices, all the different traditions, whether it's yogic, Buddhist, Christian, Sufi, it's all about coming home to the truth. Where does it reside? Well, it resides in each and every one of us. That's where it's going to be found. So we keep coming home to that. And this paced breathing and the use of mantra are particularly important because the ordinary mind needs that kind of support. What can it turn to in the midst of activity, in the midst of being in the world? This is a time where sadhana practices, spiritual practices, meditative practices are meant to be integrated into everyday life. That what in the Eastern traditions are called householders, people living in the world, in relationships, in marriages, families, working in the world. This is the crucible for knowing the infinite, for knowing the divine. Becoming rooted in that and walking that into the world. So everyone is called to this. Not just those who can spend time in an ashram or a monastery or a zendo or a gongpa. No, everybody. Because that's the truth of who everybody is. And when we share that vision, when we get into that vision, when we get to see through the eyes of the infinite and walk that into the world, then we're empowered to transform the world. And that's something that came up at the end of our last satsang. The questions from 2 weeks ago had to do with fear. And how do we get free of fear? How do we know we're free of fear? How do we deal with fear? And what are the yogis and the great, practitioners of these paths? What are they doing to get free of fear? How do we live that into the world here and now? It's great Buddha did it 2,500 years ago. But what he was tapping into is as real and present now as it was for him 2,500 years ago. And that's why the mystic traditions always emphasize personal experience. We have to know this for ourselves. Not good enough to have a saint from 300, 500, 2,000, whatever years ago. No, here and now, it's accessible, it's available, it's the truth now. How do we know that? How do we live that? And when it comes to fear, well, fear and its cousin is anger. And we know this sort of neurophysiologically, there's a part of the brain, the amygdala. It's in a sub-cortical region of the brain, and it's related to the fight, flight, freeze response. Well, that's what underlies fear and anger reactivity. And there's a lot of research that has been done now, scientific research, on the impact of meditative practices on that area of the brain, including just what we were doing now, this slowing and pacing of the breath. Well, that very simply starts to transform what's going on in the body and the brain. So if we sustain that pattern for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour, so that we're really bathing our nervous system, our mind, our brain, our whole body in a shift of pattern, the shift away from reactivity into this calming, steadying pattern, well, we can decondition that reactivity, the automaticity with which suddenly we're getting angry, suddenly we're getting upset. Those are just conditioned patterns. And that's not new to our physiology now. That's what the yogis were dealing with thousands of years ago as well. And that's what, in part, evolved these kinds of practices, and the efficacy of them was seen for thousands of years now. So we know that by slowing and pacing the breath, letting it deepen, beginning to detach our awareness from automatically engaging the mind, and now we're just watching the breath. We're listening for that silent repetition or silently repeating mantra with the breath. And that can be the aham mantra. It can be Om Namah Shivaya. It can be Om Mani Padme Hum. It's interesting that some of the Maha mantras, the great mantras, in the Buddhist tradition and the yogic tradition, they have 6 syllables. They're known as 6-syllable mantras. Om Namah Shivaya is a 6-syllable mantra. Om Mani Padme Hum is a 6-syllable mantra. Well, it turns out research was done, and one study was done in the British Journal of Medicine. It was published in 2000, so 23 years ago, looking at the impact of what happens when somebody is silently repeating mantra along with the breath. Well, guess what? If you silently say Om Namah Shivaya once on the inhalation, Om Namah Shivaya silently once on the inhalation, and the exhalation, inhalation, keep that going. Or the same with Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. It brings the breathing into that rhythmic pace, and it begins to drop our blood pressure, slow our heart rate, change what's going on with the amygdala. All these different things are happening just as a result of that kind of transformation of a breath pattern that the yogis recognized. So that's part of what we're engaged in, is being able to really tune into that and make use of that kind of practice. When we're doing these ancient practices, well, they have very modern application. And that's why research has included them into the use of clinical psychology, stress management, peak performance training, because a lot of the fight, flight, freeze response is what gets in the way of everything from our optimal performance in any given task or situation to what underlies certain disorders, dysregulation related to anger and related to anxiety. So these practices are empowering us to get free of that. And one of the things that came out in some of the early research on meditators, Zen masters and yogic masters, was that part of the brain that is so automatic in its reactions, and another part of the brain that was thought to be hardwired into really disregarding anything that's continuously present. Now, it's called the habituation response. It's why we don't feel the shoes on our feet, the shirt on our back, a necklace we might be wearing after a period of time, or a repetitive noise, the ticking of a clock. The nervous system is geared towards saying, well, if something's non-threatening, I don't need to pay attention to it, and it stops. Well, it's very interesting that the research was showing that yogis and Zen masters could either stay with that or not have it even begin. They got free of all that profound level, what was thought to be hardwired in, level of reactivity. That is important to know, not just from a physiological standpoint in dealing with stress. The aim of these practices is to know the infinite, to know the divine moment by moment. It's always present. It's always present. If we have a part of our nervous system saying, I don't have to pay attention to something that's always present and not threatening, we are actually shutting the door to experiencing that living presence all the time, everywhere. It's partly what gets really transformed through these practices, because we want to experience that living presence, whether we call it Buddha mind, pure consciousness, boundless self, I don't care what we call it, across all traditions, always present, always loving, always conscious, always there. We, on a more personal level, related to body and mind, our nervous system, well, it evolved in a lot of ways to avoid threats. If something's non-threatening, I need my attentional capacities available to be always constantly surveying our environments for what I need to be wary of. What's threatening? What do I need to react to? That's why we have that fear response, that anger response. It was built in terms of evolution for being able to sustain life, not have to think about and evaluate, is this threatening? And by then, the thing ate us, right? So we had to have this automatic circuit going on that just like went, whoop, don't think, just jump, run. Right? And that's why it's built into the old mammalian part of the brain. But we don't want to be governed by that anymore, because a lot of the times it's being triggered, there is no real threat. It's also true that what's been discovered is because that area of the brain that has that reactivity is sub-cortical, the cortex is the higher functioning part of the brain, it's a human brain. Well, the brain evolved in these stages and it didn't all get wired together right. So we have this old mammalian brain that when it perceives a threat, it goes into this automatic reaction. It wasn't built with a thinking brain that could think and imagine threats that aren't real. The zebra who freaks out because the lions are there, runs, gets away, and their amygdala shuts down. It's only fired off in the presence of real threats. We have that same amygdala, but now we added the hardware and the software, the thinking, that says, oh, I can start to imagine threatening things. I can imagine scary things. I can think about what was scary yesterday or anticipate something tomorrow, and my whole system, because it's subcortical, gets triggered. So the stress response winds up being something that plagues us because of just how things evolved and weren't wired beautifully. The practices empower us to change that, because we can do top-down changes in processing. And that's what, when we choose to shift our breathing, when we choose to stay present in the moment. So many things that are scaring the poor mind is the mind imagining things from the past or the future. What's present? What's here? What's now? That's where we have to have our attention. Now, another piece that comes out of this whole cascade of events that happens in our mind and our body, our brain, related to fear and anger, well, that's also fed by what the yogis and the Buddhist traditions and other mystical traditions saw as the root cause. What sets this whole thing up? The root cause is ignorance of the truth of who we are, avidya, right? So avidya means this root ignorance, not knowing we are the infinite. We have boundless equanimity is our nature, right? The mind knows equanimity when it says, oh, the things that disturb me are out of the way. The desire got fulfilled. Things are pleasant right now. It says, I'm peaceful because, I'm calm because. And it can say, oh, I'm calm because nothing's enervating me right now. It's not the state, right? So when we're talking about the state of consciousness that is boundless equanimity, it's uncaused. It's the very root truth of who we are. The boundless compassion, the boundless love, the boundless kindness, these are the state of being of our infinite self. The mind is used to having fleeting emotions caused by one thing or another. So it's caught in the ignorance. That ignorance is what then the mind embodies as, I'm just limited. I don't have this. I wish I had that. I got too much of this. I wish I could get rid of that. Right? It's caught up in limited I awareness, that limited identification. And so in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, they talk very famously about the chain of destruction. That what destroys our state? Well, the root cause is avidya. Out of avidya, this not knowing the infinitude of who we are, springs the limited I awareness, the ego mind, the little self. And what does that little self do? Well, it looks around and it sees different things. It's the perceiver of differences. And it perceives differences through all the senses. So that little self hangs out with sense objects. And it's in this portion from the Bhagavad Gita, says, oh yeah, we're contemplating sense objects. It means that's what we're dwelling, our attention is sticking with the sensory domain. Well, that is the nature of the ego mind. It's identified with its body and its instrument. Then it starts to see, oh, there's things that I like. There's things that I don't like. So I would like to have more of those things that I like and less of those things that I don't like. So now it's getting caught up in attachments, desires. Right? So out of the ignorance comes this limited I awareness. It's then roaming around through the senses, getting attached to some things, desiring the absence of some things. Then, when its desires aren't met, what happens? Well, we all know what happens. We get frustrated, right? So the root of annoyance, irritability, anger, frustrated desire. That's what the yogis saw. Right? And we can always trace it back to some frustrated desire. We're not being treated the way we wanted. We're not getting what we wanted. We're not being paid what we wanted at work. Whatever it is, we'll always see there's some frustrated desire underlying the irritation and the anger. Well, that then starts to add this emotional energy, emotion, energy and motion. Now we start getting going on that. And then the chain of destruction deepens. It says now delusion sets in. Because now, not only I'm limited, I'm getting identified with feelings. Feelings arise. I'm frustrated. I am frustrated. Not I'm watching frustration go by related to this thing called the mind. That would be a state of witnessing. We could do that, and we're invited to do that. But the ordinary mind's not doing that. It's going, yeah, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, I'm angry at this, I don't like this, or I'm afraid. I see something, it's threatening. And the same thing applies to fear. What we get identified with, what we fear. As that delusion deepens, we lose further the discrimination. Discrimination in the yogic sense is that ability to know the truth of who we are and what we're not. These powerful emotions that get triggered, well, they really grab our sense of, yeah, that is me. I am that. I am angry, or I am upset, or I am freaked out. What's happening with the environment? What's happening with, rulership in the world? What's going on? All these things are provocative. The mind identifies with it, loses more of its discrimination, and they say, then it ends with that loss of discrimination, one perishes. Meaning one's wise self-experience perishes. One's ability to be able to be fully conscious in the moment perishes. It's what keeps the cycle of birth and death going. Because as we perish, some desires were unmet. They set the pattern for the next life and seeking the fulfillment of those desires in the next life. So the yogic traditions and Buddhist traditions and mystical traditions say, no, first we have to get grounded in the truth of who we are. That's where absolute equanimity is. That's where absolute peace is. It's uncaused. It's not I'm peaceful because. It's peace that is unshakable. It's a peace that then informs us, even if the body is in pain, even if the body is dying. That state of peace is untouched by it. Even if things are threatening, that state of peace, that state of equanimity, that state of love, that state of compassion, be untouched by it. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about, and what he brought into helping to, bring peace about and an end to the Vietnam War. He walked that state of being into those negotiations, into the halls of power. He walked that living presence because he embodied it. So for us to be free, we have to have that 100% conviction based on the 100% experience of the truth of who we are beyond the ordinary mind. So we can keep coming back to that. So we can still, from that state, see the threats that are in the world. But now, coming from that state of being, we're empowered to deal with it with clarity, with skillfulness, with presence, to bring the fullness of all our capacities into those moments. There's another thing that's come out of current research that really goes along with this chain of destruction that Krishna, the Mahayogi, the Lord Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita was instructing, was that, well, if anger and fear get going, it literally takes our frontal lobes offline, our higher order thinking. So that's why if we suddenly get angry or upset or afraid, we might say and do things that at another time we go, what was I saying? I said that to a loved one? How could I have done that? Because the frontal lobes that have an inhibitory effect on the amygdala and that acting out, well, they started to go offline. That's part of how this poor brain was built, to deal with sudden threats that you don't want to have to think about first. But when it's not a real threat, when we really need to be thinking, when we really need to be bringing clarity and wisdom, compassion into the moment, we want to be established in that. And that's what's empowering us through the practices. And that's what empowers us to both look at sort of what are the personal causes of fear or anxiety or anger in our lives, as well as the collective ones. What are we dealing with as a culture, as a society? What are we dealing with in the world when we see the destruction of the environment and so many species being killed by human actions? When we see people being exploited and treated badly by governments, corporations, where exploitation begins to flourish more and more, that can upset us. But we understand what it's upsetting. It's upsetting my mind. My being, that stays clear. The more we have the capacity to know the infinitude of being, even while seeing the mind, and the mind as an instrument that is empowering us to bring that clarity and that wisdom into the world, to try and bring about solutions to these extraordinary challenges facing humanity right now. And we need that clarity, even while we recognize that, there's part of the mind, there's part of the body, that if it dwells on those threats, then it may get angry at some things, fearful of others. We see that, but it's contained. We see it contained. It's contained in the mind. It's contained in what we might call the conventional self, but our infinitude of being, oh, that's free. That's always free. And so we want to know that and have it then more and more inform the truth of who we are in the moment, inform the kinds of actions we can take in the moment, the kind of clarity we can bring to a situation in the moment. That's what we're engaged in. Swami Vivekananda said, the man that is not perfectly dead to himself, the little self, all these reactions, is quickly tempted and overcome in small and trifling things. Easily triggered. That's the nature of the ordinary mind. It's easily triggered. Now, one person's triggers may be different than another person's triggers. The underlying dynamic is what's feeding it in all people. And that's what the various practices really are aimed at. Get at the root dynamic. One is the root ignorance. Come to know the truth of who you are. Become established in that. Feel the boundless, rapturous love that is the awareness of I am. I am is first postured by the mind. He goes, I am. Oh yeah, I got that. No, you don't got that. And that, keep going. Dissolve all of that. Because that pure I am is boundless love, boundless compassion, boundless wisdom, unshakable equanimity. These are the qualities of that awareness of I am. That's why Moses reported back from the burning bush saying, I am that, I am. That's the divine awareness of pure being. We want to be rooted in that. Then, with that compassion, that the divine looks at everything, we look at our own mind. We look with that compassion. And we say, oh, look, you're floundering. You're so upset by this and so triggered by that. Let's calm that down. Let's see what, with clarity and wisdom, we can do to transform what's going on internally and externally. First, internally. Let's get really clear inside. Then we're fully empowered to engage the world and see what we can also transform externally. That's how we break this chain of destruction. We break it at the very start by knowing the truth of who we are. And then, even if we get caught up, every point along the way is a time to remind ourselves, wait a minute, I'm becoming the mind. Wait a minute, I'm becoming the feelings. Who am I? Discrimination is that answer to who am I? Neti. I'm not the mind. I'm not the body. I'm not the roles. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm the infinite. I am the infinite. Then we're empowered to say, okay, the root cause of everyone's suffering is this avidya. So we like everybody to wake up to that, the truth of who they are. But then there are what we call proximate causes, the immediate situations. If you don't have enough food, if you don't have safety, if you're being abused and exploited, it's not enough to, you don't want that person to go, oh, you should meditate on the self. Would that be good? Sure. But also all those relative causes need to be addressed because they can be transformed. They're born of ignorance. They're born of somebody else's ignorance, then acting out in a way that exploits and imposes suffering on somebody else. So we want to be empowered and skillful on all those different levels. And it comes back to how do we be established in the truth of who we are. From that, we can then walk skillfully into the world. We can bring the presence of that knowing into the world, into our lives, into our relationships. And what we were doing before with the practice, using mantra and the breath, that's what we're going to be doing now. We're going to be chanting this Maha Mantra, this great mantra, Om Namah Shivaya. Means simply, I bow to, I revere the auspicious one, the divine within ourselves, within everything, everyone. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. And when we chant that, we chant it slowly. And chanting is another form of pranayama. Chanting is another form of practice that regulates our breath. We inhale, and then we wind up chanting the Om. We inhale, and then we wind up chanting the Nama. We inhale, and then we wind up chanting the Shivaya. We're controlling the breath as we do that. And that too winds up changing our physiology, changing our nervous system, and gives the mind a place to land. Land on this exquisite throb of the infinite called mantra. Land on this thought form called mantra. Mantra means that which protects us from the ignorance of wrong identification. We identify with, I am the absolute. I am the auspicious one, Shiva. I am the mantra. I am the consciousness that gives birth to that. That's the awareness we practice when we're repeating mantra. And so after we stop chanting and we just rest in the stillness and the silence, we continue that practice. We continue bringing the mind back to Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. I am that. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. The mind comes up, we let it go. Om Namah Shivaya. That's the practice. That's what transforms the conditioned mind, sets it free, becomes the deconditioned mind. So we're going to be chanting for a few minutes and then just sitting in the stillness. In that stillness, the profound letting go into the truth of who you are. Have always been, are here now, have always been that. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Shri Kali Mandevi Ki Jai. Om Namah Shivaya. Bring the mind back over and over again to this throb of its own true self. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. A homing beacon for the mind. It gets lost in its own creation. Time to come back to the divine creation. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Rest on that until all becomes silent and still. Just revel in that. Kali Mahandevi ki jai. So we end with this prayer, and may our practices truly benefit everyone, and may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. Cutting through that root ignorance, avidya, just means coming home to the truth of who we are. Because all suffering comes out of that ignorance. The suffering that we create for ourselves, the suffering we impose on others, the suffering they're imposing on us or other beings, all rooted in ignorance. Ignorance, not knowing the truth, not knowing the divine essence, who you are, what all creation is. If we know that, how can we treat another being with disrespect? How can we exploit another being? There's no room for exploitation. There's no room for racism. There's no room for all these things born of ignorance. So coming home to the truth of who we are so truly empowers us to change what's going on inside of ourselves, to change what we then walk into the world. So keep coming back. Come back to the truth of who you are through breath, through mantra, through contemplation, through every means possible. It's always here right now. Never a time, never a place that the divine isn't present. We don't perceive it because our attention is over there, locked into some little sense of me. That's what we need to clear. Know the fullness of being. With that comes the fullness of heart, the fullness of love that embraces all. That's born of knowledge. Suffering is born of ignorance. To know the truth, live the truth, revel in the truth. So, once again, I want to thank you for being ones who do these practices, that bring that truth to life, that empower you to live it into your world, your relationships, your work, everything. Because that's what we need. More and more people doing that, living the truth with all the love and compassion, wisdom and strength and unshakable equanimity. So that we're not overwhelmed by the suffering of the world. Because the ordinary mind is what gets overwhelmed by that. So we need to be rooted in the truth of who we are, and that it's possible for all beings to know that and live free. So thank you. Thank you for engaging in the practices that empower you to live in that way and transform this world. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing you again couple of weeks.